The fall. The arena was a monster of stone and steel, its walls rising like a cage around the battlefield. Thousands of voices filled the air, a storm of cheers and cruel laughter. The people wanted blood, they wanted to see someone fall, they wanted to see death. And tonight, they would get what they wanted. In the center of that arena, she stood, trembling but unbroken. Her name was unknown to most of the crowd, just another captive force to fight. Her body was thin, her armor cracked, and her blade shook in her hands. Yet her eyes carried a fire, a spark that had not yet gone out. Across from her stood the champion, a giant of muscle and rage, his skin armored like stone, his weapon heavy as thunder. Every scar on his body was a story of victory. Every roar from the crowd was for him. He was undefeated, he was merciless, and he had no reason to spare her life. The gate behind her closed with a grinding echo. There was no escape now, no turning back. The sand beneath her feet felt heavy, sticky with the blood of those who had fallen before. She knew what awaited her, the sharp end of the champion's blade, the silence of death. The announcer's voice boomed through the air, calling for battle. The crowd erupted, their hunger rising. The champion smiled, showing teeth like broken knives. He raised his weapon high, and the fight began. The first strike came like a storm. His blade tore through the air with the weight of a falling mountain. She barely managed to roll aside, the sand exploding where she once stood. The impact alone shook her bones, a reminder of how small she was against him. She stumbled to her feet and raised her sword. But her strike was weak, her hands shaking. The champion blocked it with ease, laughing. One backhand from him sent her sprawling across the arena floor. The crowd cheered louder, thirsty for the end. They didn't care who she was. They didn't care about her pain. They only wanted to see the champion crush another life beneath his blade. And she, broken and gasping, was the perfect offering. Her ribs ached, her vision blurred, but she stood again. There was no choice. If she stayed down, death would come faster. Her legs trembled as she faced him once more. The fire in her eyes dimmed, but it was not yet gone. The champion advanced with slow, heavy steps, savoring her struggle. He swung again, and her sword snapped under the weight of his strike. The broken piece flew into the sand, and her weapon was nothing but a jagged shard. Her hand shook as she held it, knowing it could no longer save her. The crowd howled with laughter. They shouted for her death, for her blood, for the end of the fight. The champion raised his weapon high, ready to finish it. And in that moment, she knew she was going to die. Time slowed. The roar of the crowd faded into silence in her mind. She thought of the stars she would never see again. She thought of the freedom that had been stolen from her. And she closed her eyes, awaiting the strike, awaiting the end, awaiting death. But just as the weapon came down, the world changed. A sharp light cut through the air. It was not a scream, not a cheer, but something new, something shocking. The champion staggered, roaring in pain. An arrow, glowing with fire, had struck his shoulder. The crowd gasped, their voices turning from laughter to confusion. Her eyes opened wide. She lay on the ground, staring in disbelief. Someone had fired that arrow. Someone had dared to interrupt the fight. The champion roared again, furious. And then, from the shadows of the gate, a figure stepped forward. It was not another champion, not a beast, not one of the arena's masters. It was a human, plain, fragile, small compared to the monsters of this world. Yet he walked with no fear, his bow still glowing in his hands. His eyes locked on the champion as if the crowd, the danger, the entire world meant nothing. The crowd fell into silence. For the first time, they did not laugh, they did not cheer. They only watched, breathless, as the human stood in the light. And she, broken on the ground, could only whisper one word in disbelief. Human. The arrow. The arena froze. The champion stood tall, but his roar was no longer pure victory. Blood dripped from his shoulder where the glowing arrow had struck. The crowd, so loud a heartbeat ago, fell into shocked silence. All eyes turned to the gate. The figure stepped forward slowly, each footstep calm, unhurried. The firelight of the arena torches revealed him, a human. Not a beast, not a monster, not a titan of the games, but a human. The audience could not believe it. Humans were whispers in taverns, weak creatures from distant colonies. They were seen as fragile, breakable prey. No one expected to see one step into the blood-soaked sand of the arena. The human wore no shining armor. His clothes were simple, worn from travel, his chest marked with scars. In his hand, he carried a bow, ancient in design, but alive with strange light. Each arrow glowed faintly, humming as if it carried the fury of stars. The heroine, lying broken on the sand, stared at him through blurred eyes. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She wondered if he was real or only a dream born in the moment before death. Why would a human come here, to this place of monsters? Why would he risk his life for her, a stranger? The champion roared again. His voice shook the walls of the arena. With a growl, he pulled the glowing arrow from his shoulder and snapped it in two. The sound cracked like thunder, a challenge, a promise of pain. The crowd found its voice again. They screamed in rage, in disbelief, in mockery. "Kill him," they shouted. "Crush the human." Laughter rolled through the stands, cruel and sharp. For the people, this was entertainment, a fragile man daring to face a god of war. But the human did not flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the champion, sharp, unyielding. There was no fear in him, no tremor in his hands. Instead, there was only calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. The champion charged. Each step was like an earthquake, shaking the ground. His massive weapon raised high, ready to split the human in two. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for blood. The heroine's heart pounded, certain the human would be crushed. But the arrow came faster. A streak of light cut through the air, striking the ground before the champion's feet. The sand erupted in sparks, and the beast of a man stumbled back. The crowd gasped, the laughter dying on their lips. The human had not missed, he had warned. He was telling the champion, "Step closer, and the next will pierce your heart." The champion roared louder, enraged. He swung his weapon with fury, cutting the air, but the human was already moving. He rolled, light on his feet, drawing another arrow with speed. His movements were sharp, precise, practiced. This was not a wanderer, not a weak man. This was a warrior. The crowd shifted uneasily. They had come for a simple execution. But what they saw now was something new, something impossible. The human moved differently than any fighter they had seen. He was small but untouchable, fragile but unstoppable. The heroine blinked through blood and dust, her body broken, her voice weak. But her mind was alive with one thought. He is fighting for me. The champion struck again. His blade missed, slamming into the ground and cracking the stone beneath the sand. Before he could pull it free, the human fired. The arrow struck his arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. The arena shook with gasps and shouts. For the first time, the champion was not in control. For the first time, he bled before the crowd. And for the first time, the people did not laugh. They watched breathless. The human lowered his bow for a moment and spoke. His voice was steady, carrying across the silence of the arena. "You've taken enough lives," he said. "Tonight, that ends." The words cut deeper than any arrow. The crowd hissed and booed, furious at his defiance. But beneath their rage, there was something else, a whisper of fear, a spark of respect. The heroine felt her heart race. She no longer awaited death. She awaited something else, hope. And she could not look away from the human who stood between her and the champion. The giant bellowed one last time. His hand reached for his weapon, rage burning in his eyes. But the human was already drawing another arrow. Its glow brighter than the last, its hum sharper. The crowd leaned forward, the air heavy with tension. Everyone knew the next shot would change everything. And then, with a deep breath, the human let the arrow fly. The human enters. The arrow struck, and the arena trembled. The giant staggered, his roar echoing off the stone walls. Blood spilled into the sand, staining it darker. The people in the stands leaned forward, eyes wide, their laughter silenced. And then the human stepped fully into the light. He was no hero from legend, no armored knight with shining steel. He was a man, ordinary in shape, lean and scarred. Yet in his presence, there was something unshakable, something that made even monsters hesitate. His bow still glowed faintly, but his eyes held the real fire. They were not the eyes of prey, not the eyes of a slave. They were the eyes of someone who had chosen to walk into death and smile at it. The crowd felt it, the champion felt it, and even the broken woman on the ground felt it. Whispers spread through the stands. Impossible, someone hissed. A human cannot fight here. They are weak, they are frail, they do not belong. But the whispers carried fear as much as mockery. For weakness did not walk like this. Fragility did not stare down a giant and hold steady. The champion ripped the glowing arrow from his chest. He crushed it in his fist and bellowed with fury. His weapon, massive as a tree, was raised once more. He pointed it at the human like a judge passing sentence. His meaning was clear: you'll die next. The human did not answer with words. He answered with a step forward, calm and steady. The sound of his boots against the sand echoed louder than the roars of the crowd. Each step was defiance, each step a promise. The heroine's vision swam, but she watched him. She could not look away. She had seen countless warriors fall, countless lives ended. But never had she seen someone walk like this. He was not here for survival, not here for glory. He was here for something else, something she did not yet understand. The crowd began to mock again, desperate to crush their own unease. "Break him!" they shouted. "Show him what true power is." Laughter rolled across the seats, but sounded thinner now. For every laugh there was a silence, and in that silence lived a dangerous thought. What if the human wins? The champion struck first. The blade came down with a force that split the ground. Dust and sparks filled the air. But when it cleared, the human was not broken. He had moved faster than the eye could follow. And in his hand, another arrow glowed, ready to fly. The audience gasped. The champion snarled, realizing he was facing not a lamb, but a wolf in smaller skin. The human finally spoke, his voice sharp but steady. "You think strength is size," he said. "You think victory is crushing the weak." He raised the bow, the string drawn tight. "You'll learn tonight that strength is will." The words cut deeper than steel. The crowd roared in rage, furious at the insult. But even as they screamed, many could not stop staring, because the human's words carried weight. And weight has a way of sinking into the heart. The champion charged again, his fury greater. The ground shook as he swung with all his might. The human rolled, sand flying beneath him. He loosed the arrow. It struck, grazing the champion's face. A line of blood opened across the giant's cheek. The crowd howled, the champion roared, but the human's expression did not change. The heroine felt something rise inside her chest. It was not fear, not despair, but something she had long forgotten: hope. If a human could stand against the champion, maybe the impossible was not impossible after all. But hope was dangerous. The champion slammed his fist into the ground, shaking the arena. The shock wave through the human back, dust swallowing him. For a moment, the crowd cheered, certain he was finished. The heroine's heart sank. Had it ended so quickly? Had he fallen like the rest? The dust cleared, and the human was already on his feet, his bow still in hand. His lip bled, his arm shook, but his eyes still burned. The crowd fell into silence once more. Even wounded, he stood as if nothing could bend him. The champion roared, lifting his weapon for the final blow. The human raised another arrow, brighter than the last. The air between them hummed with tension. The heroine's breath caught in her throat. and the crowd leaned forward as one, knowing the next strike would decide everything. But just before the weapons clashed, the human did something no one expected. He lowered his bow. The crowd gasped in confusion. The champion blinked in rage. And the human spoke again, his voice quiet but clear. "I'm not here for you," he said. His eyes turned toward the broken woman on the sand. "I'm here for her." The arena went silent. The crowd did not understand. The champion snarled in fury, and the heroine's eyes widened, her heart pounding. Why would a human risk everything for her? Clash of strength. The champion's fury shook the arena. He pounded his chest like a war drum, his voice echoing like thunder. Dust rained from the stone walls. The crowd screamed for violence. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath his rage. The human stood his ground, one man with a bow against a monster of flesh and steel. He did not move, did not flinch. His calm was a blade sharper than any weapon, and it cut into the champion's pride deeper than the arrow in his flesh. The giant charged. His steps were earthquakes, each one shaking the sand. He swung his weapon, a blade large enough to split a mountain. The air cracked with its speed. If it struck, the human would be broken in two. But the human moved, not with the speed of muscle, but with the speed of thought. He slid across the sand, rolling beneath the swing. The blade slammed into the earth, sending shards of stone flying. The crowd roared in shock. The champion's weapon had missed. The human rose, his bow already drawn. The arrow flew, a streak of light through the dust. It struck the champion's leg, making him stumble. The giant roared, more in rage than pain. The sound was a storm, shaking the very breath from the crowd. Again the champion swung. Again the human dodged, slipping through the storm of strikes. Each miss made the giant angrier, louder, wilder, and each arrow from the human cut him deeper. Not in flesh, but in pride. The crowd had never seen this before. No one had ever made the champion chase. No one had ever made him miss. They shouted and cursed, torn between rage and awe. Some still laughed, calling the human a fool. But others leaned forward with shining eyes, for they had never seen hope walk on two legs until now. The heroine on the ground could hardly breathe. Her ribs burned, her body broken, but her mind was alive. She watched as the human danced between death and life. Fragile yet fearless, small yet unbreakable. Her heart whispered a question she could not understand. Why him? Why here? Why now? The champion stopped, his chest heaving like a furnace. Blood streaked his arms and legs where arrows had struck. He spat into the sand, his rage boiling into something darker. He dropped his massive blade, and the arena gasped. The champion did not need steel to kill. His hands were weapons enough. He lunged, faster than his size should allow. His fist was a hammer, swinging toward the human skull. The human ducked, the wind of the strike nearly tearing him from his feet. He fired point blank, the arrow burying itself into the giant's arm. The champion roared, his fist still smashing into the ground, cracking stone. The fight was no longer skill against strength. It was will against rage. The human's every move was precise, controlled. The champion's every strike was fury, a storm with no limit. And the crowd could feel it. This was no longer sport. This was war. The sand turned red beneath their feet. Blood from the giant, blood from the human where strikes had grazed. Both bled, both staggered, but neither bent. The air between them crackled with heat. Every eye in the arena fixed on the two figures. No one blinked. No one looked away. The human fired again. The arrow struck the champion's chest, piercing deep. But the giant did not fall. He seized the human with one massive hand, lifting him high into the air. The crowd roared, certain the end had come. The heroine screamed, though no sound left her throat. The giant's grip tightened, bones creaking. The human gasped, his bow falling to the sand. The crowd cheered, their hunger renewed. At last, the human would break. At last, the arena would drink his blood. But then, the human's hand moved. Slow, steady, defiant. From his belt, he drew one last arrow. It burned brighter than all the rest. The light seared the champion's eyes, and with his final breath of strength, the human drove it upward into the giant's neck. The champion howled, stumbling back, blood spraying across the sand. The human fell hard to the ground, rolling through dust and pain. The arena erupted into chaos. Half scream for the champion, half scream for the human. The noise was deafening, a storm of voices. The champion staggered, one hand clutching his bleeding neck, the other reaching for his weapon. His steps were unsteady, his roar weaker. But he did not fall, not yet. The human lay on the ground, chest heaving, blood on his lips. He looked broken, finished his bow, just out of reach. The heroine crawled forward, her hand stretching weakly toward him. Her voice cracked in the air. "Get up," she whispered. "Please get up." The champion raised his weapon once more. The human struggled to rise, his body refusing to obey. The crowd held its breath. The end was here. The next strike would decide everything. And then, from somewhere deep, a sound filled the arena. Not the roar of the champion, not the cries of the crowd, but a heartbeat, steady, strong, unyielding. The human's heartbeat. His eyes opened again, and in them was fire, a fire no blow, no chain, no monster could ever kill. Rising hope. The champion's shadow loomed over the human, his weapon raised high, his roar shaking the stone walls. Every eye in the arena was fixed on him. This was supposed to be the end, the moment the crowd had been waiting for. But the human did not stay down. His body trembled, his chest heaved with pain. Yet his eyes burned, brighter than the torches on the walls. He pushed against the ground, slow, stubborn, unstoppable. Every heartbeat was a hammer, driving him back to his feet. The crowd screamed for blood. They shouted for the champion to crush him. But their voices cracked with something new doubt. For the human should have broken, should have stayed down. Yet he rose again. The heroine crawled through the sand, her hands shaking, her body screaming with pain. But her eyes never left the human. She had seen warriors stronger than him fall in seconds. She had seen champions twice his size kneel in defeat. But never had she seen someone rise like this. Not with broken bones, not with blood dripping from his lips, not with death waiting at his side. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why won't he stay down?" The champion roared and swung. The weapon sliced through the air, fast and deadly. But the human moved, slower than before, yet still enough. The blade grazed his shoulder, blood spilling. He staggered, but did not fall. Instead, he lifted his bow once more. His hand shook, his breath ragged, but the arrow still burned bright. The crowd gasped. For the first time, they did not cheer the champion's strike. For the first time, they leaned forward to see if the human could stand. A whisper began to ripple through the stands. Maybe he can win. The champion struck again, his rage endless. The human dodged, barely, firing another arrow. It struck the giant's side, forcing him back a step. The crowd gasped louder. A giant forced backward by a human. The impossible was happening before their eyes. The heroine's heart raced. Her pain seemed smaller, her fear quieter. For in the human struggle, she saw something greater. Not just strength, not just skill, but will. A will that refused to die. The champion bled now. Dark streaks ran down his arms, across his chest. He snarled in fury, ashamed before his people. How could he, the undefeated, be touched by prey? How could a human stain him with wounds? He charged again, but the human did not step back. He stood his ground, his bow steady, his gaze unbroken. The crowd went silent. Even the torches seemed to burn quieter, as if the whole arena was holding its breath. The arrow flew. It struck deep into the giant's shoulder, spinning him to the side. The roar that followed was not victory, not power. It was pain, real pain. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed for the champion. Others cheered for the human. The stands shook with division. The air alive with a battle, not just in the arena, but in their hearts. The heroine felt tears blur her vision. For so long she had believed the games were unbreakable, that the arena always devoured the weak, that there was no hope, no escape. But this man, this fragile human, was proving her wrong. With every step, every strike, he was rewriting the story. The champion stumbled, his breath ragged, his body slowing. The human bled, his steps heavy, but his fire only grew. And in that moment the crowd began to change. They saw not a victim, not prey, but a warrior who refused to die. "Rise!" a voice shouted from the stands. Then another and another. Soon the chant grew. It was not for the champion, but for the human. The arena that once mocked him now roared his defiance. The sound shook the walls. The champion's face twisted in fury. The heroine pressed her hand to the sand. Her strength returned in sparks, not flames. But it was enough. The human had given her more than protection. He had given her something she thought lost forever. Hope. The champion screamed and charged with all his might. The human steadied his bow. His last arrow glowed in the torchlight, brighter than fire. The crowd rose to their feet. The heroine held her breath. The arena itself seemed to tremble as the moment came. The champion swung. The human fired. Light and steel collided in the center of the arena. A shock wave tore through the sand, throwing dust into the air. No one could see. No one could breathe. The world disappeared in blinding light. And when the dust cleared, two figures stood in the center. One on his knees, blood pouring, weapon fallen. The other swaying, his bow still in hand, eyes burning. The crowd screamed as one, their voices a storm of disbelief. But the fight was not finished. Not yet. The turning point. The arena was chaos. Dust swirled in the air, blood painted the sand. Two figures still stood, broken but unbending. The champion, his chest heaving, his weapon slick with blood. The human, swaying on his feet, his bow cracked, his body trembling. The crowd screamed from every side. Some shouted for the champion, their voices sharp with rage. Others roared for the human, their throats raw with belief. The arena had never sounded like this before. It was no longer just a fight. It was a war of faith. The champion's eyes burned with hate. His pride was shattered, his strength wounded. How could a human, a fragile insect, make him bleed? He snarled, spitting blood into the sand. "You will crawl," his voice thundered, "and you will die slowly." The human did not answer. He raised his bow again, though his arms shook like broken branches. His lips were cut, his chest bruised, but his eyes still blazed. He did not need words. His silence was defiance, and that silence enraged the champion more than any insult. With a roar, the giant charged. The ground split beneath his steps, the walls shook. He swung his weapon down with the fury of a collapsing mountain. The human leapt aside barely. The blade ripped through stone, sparks showering the sand. But this time the human stumbled. His knees buckled, his body crumpling under exhaustion. The crowd gasped. The champion saw his chance. He struck again, faster, harder, relentless. The human dodged once, twice, but the third strike caught him. The blade scraped across his side, tearing flesh. Blood poured. The human fell to one knee, his bow slipping from his grip. The crowd roared in triumph. The champion bellowed in victory. The heroine's heart stopped. "No," she whispered, crawling closer. "Don't fall. Not now, not like this." The champion raised his weapon for the killing blow. The crowd screamed for it, hungry. And for the first time, the human did not rise immediately. His hands trembled, pressed against the sand. His breath came slow, shallow, painful. His fire flickered. For a heartbeat, it seemed the end had come. The heroine's voice broke through the noise. "You can't stop here," she cried, her voice hoarse, desperate. Her bloodied hand reached out across the sand. "You showed me hope. You can't take it back." The human lifted his head. His eyes met hers, and something changed. He pushed against the ground, his arms steadying. His bow slid back into his grip, cracked but not broken. Like him, the crowd fell silent. The champion froze, fury twisting into disbelief. How could the human rise again? How could he stand when his body was already ruined? The human's voice rang out at last. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You don't understand," he said. "This fight was never about strength." He raised his bow, blood dripping from his arm. It was about will. The crowd erupted, half in awe, half in rage. The champion charged once more. But the human was ready. He fired. The arrow burned brighter than before. It pierced the giant's chest, sinking deep. The champion roared, stumbling back. But even that was not enough. The giant still stood, his rage keeping him alive. He swung wildly, his weapon crashing against the walls. The arena shook as if the world itself was breaking. The human fired again, another arrow. It struck, but the champion did not fall. The heroine's heart pounded. How much more could he endure? How many times could he rise before he finally broke? The champion's weapon came down one last time. The human leapt forward instead of back. The blade cut across his shoulder, blood spraying. But the human was already inside the giant's guard, close enough for his last arrow. He pressed it against the champion's chest and whispered, "This ends now." The arrow flared, brighter than fire, brighter than the sun. The impact threw both of them backward. The crowd screamed, blinded by the light. The heroine shielded her eyes, her heart tearing in fear. When the light faded, two figures lay on the sand. One massive, unmoving, his weapon shattered. One small, still breathing but barely. The arena was silent. No one knew who had truly won. The heroine dragged herself across the sand. Her hands scraped raw, her body shaking. She reached the human's side, her voice trembling. "Stay with me," she whispered. But his eyes were closed, his chest rising faintly. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the truth. And then the champion stirred. His hand twitched, his chest heaved with a weak breath. The crowd gasped. The fight was not finished. The turning point had come, and the end was yet to be written. The champion falls. The arena held its breath. Dust floated in the air like ash after fire. Two bodies lay broken on the sand, the giant and the human. The crowd leaned forward, every voice silenced. This was the moment that would be remembered forever. The giant stirred first. His massive hand pressed against the ground, forcing his weight up. Blood poured from his wounds, but his rage carried him forward. He rose slowly, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. Even half dead, he was still a monster, still a god of the arena. The human did not move. He lay on the sand, chest rising weakly, eyes closed. The heroine crawled to his side, her voice shaking. "Please," she whispered, "open your eyes." But he stayed silent. The crowd began to cheer again. "Finish him," they roared. "Crush the human." Their voices shook the walls. The champion stumbled toward the fallen man, his weapon gone, his fists clenched like iron. He would kill with his hands, if nothing else. The heroine looked at the human. Tears streaked her face, her heart pounding in terror. "You can't leave now," she said, her voice breaking. "You gave me hope. Don't take it away." Her words trembled in the dust. And then his fingers twitched. The human's eyes opened. Faint, bloodshot, but burning. He coughed, pain ripping through him. But his hand still clutched one last arrow. The bow was gone, shattered, but the arrow still burned in his grip. The champion towered above them. His shadow covered them like night. He raised his hand to strike. The crowd screamed for death. But the human rose, slowly, painfully. Every bone screamed against him. Every wound begged him to stop. Yet he stood, arrow in hand, fire in his eyes. The arena shook with disbelief. The crowd no longer cheered, they stared in silence. This was no longer a fight, no longer a game. This was a miracle. The champion roared and swung his fist. The human did not dodge. Instead, he stepped forward, driving the glowing arrow into the giant's chest. Not with speed, not with strength, but with will. The arrow burned like a star, piercing deeper than any before. The champion froze. His roar caught in his throat, his eyes wide in shock. The fire spread through his veins, the light bursting from a wound. He staggered, his steps heavy, his body breaking. The crowd gasped, some screaming, some cheering. And then, with one final shudder, the giant fell. The ground shook with his collapse. The champion of the arena was dead. Silence. For the first time in years, silence filled the arena. No roar, no louguer, no cheers. Only the sound of the human gasping for breath. And the heartbeat of hope that had been born in every soul who watched. The heroine reached for him, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You won." The human dropped to his knees beside her. He pressed the arrow into the sand, the glow fading. His voice was weak but steady. "No," he said, "we won." The crowd erupted, not in mockery, not in scorn, but in something they had never felt before. Respect. The sound shook the sky. For the first time, they cheered not for blood, but for defiance. Not for the champion, but for the human. The heroine stared at him. This fragile creature, this impossible warrior. He was not made of stone, not built for war. And yet he had done what no one else could. He had slain the giant. He had broken the chains of fear. The human rose unsteadily and reached out his hand. His eyes locked on hers, his voice calm. "Get up," he said. "You're not done yet." Her hand trembled as she took his. The strength in his grip was not in muscle, but in will. And as he pulled her to her feet, the crowd's roar became something new. Not a hunger for blood, but a call for change. The arena that had once been a graveyard of hope had become the birthplace of something greater. A whisper carried through the stands. One word, spreading like fire. Human. And though his body was broken, his spirit unshaken, the man who came with nothing but a bow and an unyielding will had carved his place in a legend. The champion had fallen, but the story had only just begun.